morning's sessions, welcome back. And for those of you that are joining us for the first time, a very warm welcome from us here in London. Welcome back to Good Intelligence Identified 2021. I hope you got a chance to view our lunchtime listen recordings. If not, then please check them out when you have time, and the link has been sent to you if you've registered. A big thank you to our sponsors, EarthID, Innovalor, Mytech, and Entrust Worldreach, and our biometric partner, our media partner, Biometric Update, and all of our speakers and panelists for finding the time to share their knowledge with us today. A recap of our afternoon and evening sessions. We have 3 live sessions for you to enjoy, starting off with our very popular Showcasing Innovation session, where we have 3 innovators from the world of identity verification: EarthID, Entrust Worldreach, and Innovalor, the company behind the ReadID product. This is due to end at around 2:30, 2:45, and is quickly followed by our second afternoon session, a very topical discussion on the critical role of identity verification for health and vaccine passports. We have managed to get some world-class speakers for this panel representing healthcare, travel, policy advisory, financial services, and technology. This hour-long session is a must-attend session, and I'm greatly looking forward to it. Starting at 5:30 London time, we have our final session of the day, which for many on the west coast of the US will possibly be their first. And this is where our speaker, Sanjay Gupta from Mytech, is based. Sanjay has been instrumental in setting the vision and strategy for a world leader in identity verification, and I'm looking forward to my discussion on biometrics, fraud, and the life cycle of identity. I know that Mytech has been very active on the acquisition trail of late, and I will be discussing these with him in our 45-minute fireside chat later today. Some housekeeping points for you. We'll have plenty of opportunity to ask questions during our live sessions, during the Q&A part of it. And you can submit questions and queries to us outside of the live events to our email, inquiry@goodintelligence.com. We'll get through as many questions as we can, but we'll also make sure we stay on schedule so that the summit flows smoothly. Any questions that we do not cover during the live sessions, then we should respond to you individually after the event. And also keep a watch out for messages on social channels, including LinkedIn and Twitter. I would now like to welcome you all to our Showcasing Innovation in Identity Verification session. Each company will present for 10 minutes, followed by a Q&A session. Please use the Q&A function to submit a question. Our first speaker will be Shiv Aggarwal, CEO of EarthID. If you can introduce yourself first. Thank you, Shiv.
Thank you, Alan. Hello, everyone. I'm Shiv Aggarwal, founder and CEO of EarthID, a decentralized identity management platform. Could you please confirm if you are able to see my screen so that I can...
All good, thank you, Shiv.
Okay, thank you, Alan. Let me start by thanking Good Intelligence for giving this opportunity to be here and interact with the audience. So as I said, I'm Shiv Aggarwal, founder and CEO of EarthID. It's a decentralized identity management platform. We are a UK-based startup, but we are operating in US, UK, and India, and a few other regions as well. Very briefly, EarthID is an award-winning decentralized identity management platform that allows secure and frictionless exchange and verification of identity information. EarthID helps organizations reduce identity frauds, save time and cost associated with customer onboarding processes while ensuring privacy and regulatory compliance. And obviously, our long-term vision is to basically build an inclusive earth powered by self-sovereign identity. Our key focus of innovation is basically threefold. So first is self-sovereign identity. So when I say self-sovereign identity, it's a user-centric identity wherein the user is in complete control of their identity information. So when we talk about the existing solutions in the industry, we usually talk about centralized federated solutions where the identity information and actually the data also of the users is basically controlled by certain other organizations, right? For example, it could be governments, it could be employers, it could be banks, it could be financial institutions. So basically the data or even social media platforms, right? So what we have seen is that the way the current identity frameworks work, they are centralized and the user doesn't necessarily have control, and then they lack basically with this privacy and consent. Self-sovereign identity it's a model wherein the user gets to basically control their data. They get to basically decide what information they want to share with whom in a very privacy and consent oriented manner. A second area of focus is identity wallets. Obviously, it's tied to self-sovereign identity, because when we talk about SSI, it's usually basically the user interface is an identity wallet, which could be sitting on your mobile device, in the cloud, or hardware wallet, or as well as a printable wallet, right? So it's like it's a private space where you can carry your identity information securely, and then you can share it with the requesting parties like service providers. What we are doing with the ID wallets is like we are looking at them from a multi-channel, multi-tenancy perspective. So what that means is like we want to basically offer identity wallets which can work in both high-tech and low-tech environments, right? So it's about if you have a smart device, how can you basically use a mobile app which is decentralized, but then it can carry your information very securely and in an encrypted manner. Or it could be based in the cloud. So you can basically still have a web interface, but you can still do all the functionalities that you can do with a mobile-based wallet. Or you can also basically encrypt everything, encode everything, and then print it on a piece of paper and then carry it around as we do. But then it's much more secure because it's basically protected by the proprietary technology, wherein only authorized applications can read that information, right? So we have seen that when we talk about COVID passports or even let's say air tickets, where you have a barcode, but then I think the information is not necessarily very secure. But with this technology, you can basically ensure that the privacy and the security of the data is well maintained. And then also we are talking about multi-tenancy, right? Because we have seen in underdeveloped world where people have just one mobile device for a family of 5, let's say. So it's about how can they get all the benefits of this new technology, this new concept. And this is where the multi-tenancy concept comes in. So you with one device, you can still have 5 different wallets and you can still control your information. Lastly, it's about verifiable credentials, which is a W3C standard, and it's about how can your data be stored and formatted in a way which makes it very, very interoperable and portable as well, right? Because when we talk about identity information as of today, it's not necessarily very, very interoperable, right? Because different systems have a different way of storing information, right? And then also different organizations or different, I think, governments around the world, they have different formats, even for, let's say, a passport or a driving license or maybe employee ID cards, right? So the information is not necessarily very interoperable, and that is where we end up creating silos. And there's another example like healthcare industry, where the healthcare data is very siloed. So the data is very segregated between the GPs, the hospitals, and it's quite very regional as well. So if I'm living in UK, my healthcare data is in UK, but if I travel to US or India, that data doesn't flow with me. So verifiable credentials basically ensures that this data is interoperable and portable. EarthID platform basically builds trust and removes friction, because what we have seen is that there are 3 key stakeholders of an identity, a digital identity. One is the issuer of the digital identity. The second is the owner, which is basically the individual, or it could be an organization as well. And then the last is the requester of the information or the verifier. It could be a service provider, it could be a bank, it could be an insurance company. And they have to interact with each other with respect to how this information is being exchanged, verified, stored, and managed. And usually there's a huge friction because as I mentioned, the data is not very portable, right? So we end up sharing physical documents and they need to be verified. And it becomes very, very time consuming and costly affair. Large financial institutions are spending more than $500 million annually on just for customer due diligence processes, right? And this is where what EarthID does is like it brings the 3 stakeholders of the identity together on one platform, which is a loosely coupled model. And they are able to basically interact with each other using verifiable credentials. And also there's a component of distributed ledger to basically provide additional assurance. So it's basically, it creates an immutable proof of authenticity and validity of these verifiable credentials. So what happens is an issuer is able to basically issue a digital credential directly to the user wallet, and they are also able to basically write a reference record on the ledger with respect to the issuance and validity. And what the user is able to do is like they're able to carry this information, these verifiable credentials from different issuers in their wallet, and they are able to basically share this information in a very selective data disclosure fashion with the requesting parties, right? So they only share what is absolutely needed for a certain use case, right? For example, if I have to only verify my age, then I'm only verifying my age. I'm not sharing any other piece of information. And the verifiers are able to, first of all, receive this information directly from the user's wallet, but they are able to also verify the authenticity and validity from the public ledger. So this is how it basically the solution entirely works. And what EarthID has also done is like it allows users to digitize their existing identity documents. So what a user can do is like they can scan their passport, their driving license, and national ID cards across 200 countries. And this information is basically verified with respect to validity, authenticity, tampering, ownership. We also do a liveness check. So once all the checks and balances are done, that is where this information is digitized, broken down, and stored in the user wallet. So what the user is able to do is they can digitize their existing identity documents and share them with requesting parties, but they can also request digital credentials directly from the issuers. This is one use case because we are here to talk about identity proofing. One thing that I feel is that right now the solution that we have in the industry, they are not necessarily optimizing this process in the right way, because what happens is like whenever you are talking about identity proofing, it happens every time, right? So you have if for every service provider, you have to basically do that identity proofing again and again. So for I as a user, if I am basically applying for a bank, a credit card, utilities, and so many things, I have to go through that process again and again. And this is where we have this opportunity wherein we can create this identity proofing as a reusable model. And that is what EarthID does. So as I was explaining in the previous slide, the user can basically provide their existing identity documents and their biometric information and scan that using EarthID app. And what EarthID does is like basically it verifies that document and the biometric information with respect to all the checks and balances, validity, authenticity, ownership, liveness, and everything. And once all those checks and balances are done, that is where the information is locally stored on the user's device in the user wallet, which is encrypted, and it's also basically there are multiple layers of access management. So it ensures that nobody else apart from the user is able to access that information. And then it also creates a reference record on the ledger just to make sure that there's a assurance from a traceability and auditability perspective. And then you can also, as an optional step, the user can also create a backup of this information in cloud or in IPFS, just to make sure that if they lose their device or they want to port this information on a new device, they can do that, right? And this is where it does two things. It basically provides that data sync capability. Let's say if you are using more than one channel, then you can basically sync all the channels. And then secondly, it also provides a backup with respect to portability, so that tomorrow if you're changing the device, you can just recreate your identity from the backup. What you can also do is basically you can, as I mentioned, you can just encode this information and you can print it on a piece of paper. And it's basically, we call it a cryptograph. It's a proprietary technology, and it's similar to QR code, but it's much more secure, and it can carry much more data. And that is where you can encode your biometric information and your verifiable credentials and other digital information into a cryptograph, and you can carry this with in a low-tech environment, and you can basically share this information with authorized parties. I would also like to talk about there are actually numerous use cases about digital identity and how self-sovereign identity can actually optimize the processes. But these are some of the use cases. Obviously, one is the digital onboarding. So it's about how can you share your information with the service providers so that they can onboard you in a very efficient manner, in a very time and cost efficient manner. And then it's also about reusability of KYC, right? For example, if I have done and this aligns with the open banking concept, wherein if you have done your KYC with one bank, you should be able to basically reuse that same information across other banks or other financial organizations, right? So it's about taking that open banking concept and applying it across the industry. So it's about reusability of your onboarding data. Second is passwordless logins. So since your identity information is already on the device, you actually don't need a user ID or password to interact with online services, right? And this is where what EarthID allows is like, once you have created your EarthID on your device, you can actually use that device to log in seamlessly onto digital platforms without entering any user ID or password or even doing CAPTCHA. And what it ensures is like that the authenticity and the security of the authentication process is maintained. And actually one of the key aspects about this is that 80% of the data breaches happen because of weak or stolen passwords, right? And right now the passwords, the way our passwords work is like you have to create very complex passwords, or you have to use a password manager, but they are not necessarily very secure, right? Because the onus is on the user to create a very strong password and not fall prey for phishing attacks. But with this technology, the user doesn't have to worry about this, right? Because there's nothing to remember, nothing to forget, and nothing to share. And the next one is health and travel passport. Because of COVID, I think we all know that we are now going to carry our COVID passes whenever we are traveling. And this is not just about COVID, right? Because we have seen that when we do international travel, there are a lot of health certificates that we have to basically carry with us, depending on which country you are traveling to. And this is where this wallet concept can be used to carry your health certificates, your identity information when you are traveling internationally or even locally. And then because of the standardization of the data, this ensures that this could be a very, very seamless travel, wherein you don't have to basically stop at every point and manually share your information. This could be very seamless, very contactless model. And lastly, contactless and keyless entry. So it's about how can you basically gain access to physical spaces in a very hygienic, contactless manner. And again, because your data is on your wallet, and then it's also connected with your biometric information. We use multi-modal biometrics. So because of that, you can gain access to, let's say, your offices, your hospitals, or any restricted spaces by just using your EarthID or your biometric information. So it ensures that the verification and the validation happens in the background, and then you are able to seamlessly gain access. That's about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shiv. Plenty to think about in your presentation. So if you can unshare your screen. Our next speaker is John Payne, Director of Strategic Alliances for Identity Verification at Entrust Worldreach. Thank you, John.
Thanks very much, Alan. Let me just do the screen sharing thing, and perhaps you could let me know when you can see it. I think I need to put that into presentation mode. Let's see if I can do that. How's that, Alan?
That looks good. Full screen. Thank you.
Very good. Thanks very much. And thank you very much, Alan, for the introduction and for the invitation to join today. So as you mentioned, John Payne now with Entrust, formerly with Worldreach. I guess a little bit of corporate news at the beginning for those that might not have spotted it so far. If you were familiar with Worldreach software, we were acquired about 2 months ago in April by Entrust. So we are now, the whole of what was Worldreach software is now the identity verification unit inside of Entrust. We're very pleased to be on board. We think it's a great fit, and we are looking forward to doing lots of interesting things with the wider kind of Entrust family that we've joined. And today I want to focus on, just for a few minutes, in particular on what we're doing around innovating in the identity verification space, but in particular I want to talk about that in the context of some work that we're doing in travel and immigration use cases. Just to give you a sense of it, there's kind of three, what Worldreach was doing and we continue to do now we've joined Entrust, is really around these three areas. Digital identity verification and onboarding, some overlaps with what Shiv was just talking about. But we also, over on the right there, focus pretty heavily on travel and citizen services for government clients, including passports. And increasingly, bottom right, we're getting into the business that is becoming known as seamless travel, i.e. the business of a single identity flowing through the travel continuum. So we're working really in all those kind of overlapping spaces. What I want to do at the beginning is just very quickly talk about how we do identity verification as a service. We run this as a service for government and commercial travel clients. It's similar but different to some of the multiple of the offerings out there, but I just want to focus on the core pieces of it that we do in the 4 steps in the middle there is our preferred way of doing identity verification remotely. So that includes ideally using a chip rather than a dumb document, and being able to read, capture from the data page of an e-passport, for example, or of an ID card, the data, and secondly, to use that MRZ to open the chip, and in the second step there to read the chip data using NFC in the phone. And we're very pleased to be partnering with Innovalor in this, and Maarten, who's going to speak next, will talk about that step, I think, in a little bit more detail, but we're very pleased to have them as partners in this process. The third step is a liveness, a presentation attack detection. Have we got a real person as opposed to some kind of spoof? And then the fourth step there, or the next one, is a simple selfie or photograph, contemporaneous photograph, and we bring all that together and submit it. And then the value of, obviously the value of this to from the client point of view is now we've got remotely, in just a few minutes, we've got, is this a real document? Is this a live person, and does the one belong to the other? So even in just a few minutes remotely, you can see that's a powerful set of data. Excuse me. Excuse me. And so I'll move on. I want to move on briefly, if I may, to 3 use cases where we've put this kind of approach into action. The first one is really just a pure identity verification process that I've just described, but I'm going to go on to talk about where we're going, pushing the innovation beyond this kind of initial step. So the kind of simple example, and by far the biggest one that we have right now, is something that some of you will be familiar with, EU settlement scheme at the UK Home Office, which is the scheme for EU nationals who wanted to continue to live and work in the UK after Brexit. And the Home Office was looking for a way to do that in a digital way, or at least to have a digital option, such that they didn't need to have 4 or 5 million people making an appointment in person or sending their passports through in the mail. And we were very pleased to be able to win that business. And we have been for a little bit more than 2 years, 2.5 years now, running that as a service for the Home Office, such that folks who want to apply for that settled status are able to identify themselves from wherever they are remotely, using a mobile device, in most cases in less than 10 minutes, and in most cases without assistance, and again in most cases without any need to go anywhere, and without even the need in most cases to send anything through the mail. So the outcome of this, it's probably worth mentioning, is what the Home Office calls settled status. That's permanent residence in the UK. So this is not a trivial benefit, it's a very significant benefit. And we just went through earlier the part of this year, as you can see there, 5 million people who've registered themselves, have identified themselves at the beginning of that registration process using that technique. So, and the very, very large majority of those, as I say, doing that in 10 minutes without assistance. But I want to go on to talk about briefly, if I may, Alan, about a couple of other examples. Shiv just referenced the possibility of kind of travel health use cases, and I want to touch on this one because we are very pleased to be the industry lead in a partnership with CBSA, the Canada Border Services Agency, and this is a thing called the Chain of Trust, which is really the Canadian Border Agency's vision of the future. And put simply, the vision of the future is a moving border which doesn't stop. So a biometric corridor which looks more like a traditional customs corridor than it does a gate or a kiosk. So this is a flowing process, and the way that they plan to do that is by we over on the left of this diagram here, we're onboarding people in the way that I've just described you, the IDV process. We're also issuing an ICAO compliant DTC, the digital travel credential. I'll come back to that in a second if I've got time. And the other piece of this, it's just kind of represented in the middle of the diagram there, is that we've got what we call dynamic risk assessment. So we have a rules engine which picks up the CBSA policy and says, is this person sufficiently low risk such that they are suitable for the green channel? Are we satisfied that this person is somebody that is meeting the whatever the policy is to be considered low risk? And then in this case, we talk back to the traveler. So this is not just a simple IDV one and done. It's a conversation with the traveler in which we say, thank you very much for CBSA has received your information. You are considered to be suitable for the green lane. On arrival at the airport, please go to this particular channel, to the biometric lane. And this is, by the way, this is real. This is happening with real people since March of this year. And the airport that we're doing this in is Toronto. Pearson at the moment is the only one. We hope that we'll be adding a second airport in due course later this year. And so when on arrival, the person who's been given the kind of notification to go to the green lane goes along there, and they're not showing the passport, they're not showing the phone, they're not showing anything. They're simply presenting their face to a camera in the biometric lane over on the right. And of course, the border officers are just hovering around and have the option to speak to somebody if they want to speak to somebody, but there's no need for them necessarily to do that. I'll touch briefly on this one as well, because this is interesting and different but similar. This is a pilot which is ready to go but not quite started with real people yet, for the obvious reason that there aren't many people right now traveling on the Eurostar between London and Paris and Brussels and Amsterdam. We hope that situation will change very soon, and when it does, we'll be kicking off this with real people. It's all ready to go. And essentially our Eurostar, so this is a project with our partner iProve, who are one of the kind of market-leading liveness providers, and ourselves, and the owner of the project is Eurostar, the train operator. And in this case, what we're doing is similar kind of IDV process at the beginning, but we're doing something a little bit different in the sense that we're associating that through a barcode with the ticket that the person has booked online, and then on arrival at St Pancras station in London, the biometric lane is on check-in at this point. So you are showing your face in the biometric lane in order to get on the train. Here's an interesting point in terms of interoperability, which I really like about this particular pilot, and it's this: once the person has verified themselves by showing their face at the biometric lane on arrival, the data is going not to one place, but it's going to two places. It goes to Eurostar system, and it tells them that that person is checking in for the train, so there's no need to present a ticket or anything like that. It's simply a check-in for the train, but the data is also going to go to the UK Border Force as an exit check out of the UK. This person is about to leave the UK in order to go to initially France and perhaps further afield. So it's an interesting point there, Alan, I think, in terms of interoperability, because this is we're not talking about a closed system that's just within, an airline or an airport or a government use. We're actually deliberately here trying to get across a couple of those use cases to see if we can connect them. So let me finish on this because my time is up. Over on the left there, strong identity, strong vetted identity. We clearly need to know who you are, and we can, in government citizen use cases, and we can do that very, very securely now in the manner that I've described. But we don't see, and I guess this is the point that I wanted to end on, we don't see that necessarily as just an end in itself in terms of onboarding. We also believe that it's the key that can open the front door to this kind of concept of seamless travel. So, which is why we're doing a couple of other things. We're issuing ICAO compliant DTCs. We're also offering, as part of the package, a continuous risk assessment process such that we can follow that the traveler can, the traveler's identity can be used multiple times throughout the continuum. And that's my time done, Alan. Thank you. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, John. And I think it continues the kind of the narrative that we've been talking about throughout today, about identity verification is the beginning of an identity journey. So, and I think that's a very important point to make. So, thank you for that. That was excellent. Our next speaker is Maarten, CEO of Innovalor, who will be taking us through the world-leading ReadID product. And just for Maarten starts, keep those questions coming in. We've got a couple in already, really good ones that I'll ask the presenters after Maarten's presentation. So thank you very much, Maarten.
Thank you. Just to check, you see my screen, I hope?
Yes, it's not in, it's in, perhaps are you able to enlarge it at all, or?
Okay, a moment.
I may be able to do that. No.
Is this better?
Fantastic, brilliant.
Okay. Thanks for having me, Alan. So yeah, so my name is Maarten Wegam. I'm CEO and co-founder of Innovalor with the ReadID as a primary product. So apologies for the confusion with the two names. So what I'll be talking about, since this session is about innovation, is talk about NFC and how NFC can help you to create trust in identity verification. For those that attended the morning session, Alan already mentioned NFC a couple of times, and also John, our valued partner, mentioned it. So this is a new way to do remote identity verification of verifying the authenticity of documents. Innovalor is a Dutch company. We are the first, by far the first, and we're the leading one in using this NFC as part of the remote identity verification products. So I'll be discussing that in more detail as we go along. So let me start a little bit with the world we're in, right? So we're in a world where maybe gradually, with ups and downs, we're getting to see each other in real life again, but we're very much disconnected. And at the same time, we're very much connected digitally. And that's the identity proving, the remote identity proving that we have to do. So we have to remotely know who we are in a world where we cannot see each other, or pre-COVID not always wanted to see each other, because who likes going to, for example, a bank to open a bank account? No one does. In this world, we play in, and we have to do it securely, and we have to do it user-friendly with a proper user customer journey. So to remotely see who I am, you have to remotely check my passport. So that's quite difficult to do. So which of these documents are real? Would you be able to tell? Right? It's difficult enough if you have physical access to the passport. But if you only have a copy, a photograph of the passport, this is basically undoable. Right? You might be able to do some OCRing to read some of the data. But anyone with, let's say, decent computer with Photoshop and an hour to spare can make a fraudulent identity document that an OCR vendor or OCR identity document verification vendor would not be able to catch, and that's not good, right? So that jeopardizes the security of the organization doing this, but also of someone else's, another person's identity that might be stolen. So the idea here is to use the chip that's here in the passport, and this is not a new thing, right? It's maybe not so new, at least in some parts of the world. This might be new to do it for remote identification, but it's something that we've been using in airports for quite a while. Every time we fly to those e-gates, remember pre-COVID, hopefully coming soon again. Yeah, so you stick your passport in one of those e-gates, and what it does, it only accepts passports with a chip. And it verifies that chip. That's the core of the process here, verifying the chip, and then of course doing a facial verification from the photo that's in the chip, because the photo in the chip is much higher resolution, so it's easier to do a facial verification. So that same trick we do remotely using your own mobile phone by reading with the NFC antenna, and see the antenna of the passport, and then verifying the authenticity. It takes about 6 seconds. So this is a trend, right? So Alan mentioned it, but also, for example, Gartner mentioned this as the first trend in identity proofing, in the most recent identity proofing document. But also, in the UK, the Her Majesty Land Registry strongly advocates using NFC as the way to do if you do a property exchange, how to remotely identify someone. And if you do that, then you kind of secure, you're in the safe harbor, as they call it. And very recently in Switzerland, the local Swiss financial regulator is strongly advocating the use of NFC to do remote identification over optical certainly, but also video identification. So we're not alone in the world with believing in this technology. So a little bit on the technology, and I'll keep it brief, is there why are these passports so secure? So there are three mechanisms in there, right? First of all, to prevent getting access to the chip, right? We don't want to be in line for the supermarket and someone behind us reading our chip. So that's called access control, and there are two ways. The old way to do this is basic access control. The new one is PACE, which works similarly. They use a certain code which is in the machine readable zone, the two bottom lines of your passport, and that's kind of a password to get access to it, right? It's to secure access to the chip, which from a privacy perspective is a great idea. Then the most important is authenticity. So the contents of the chip, which is roughly the same things that are printed on your data page, are digitally signed by the issuing country. In my case, the Netherlands digitally signed it. So it's tamper-free. And third, but not is the cloning detection, is that you can verify that it's not only a genuine document, which you do with authenticity, but that document is there at that point in time, and not, for example, a copy that was taken 9 years ago. Yeah, so you have some form of proof of possession. Passports with chips are more widely spread than some people sometimes think, right? So in this map, we see everywhere where it's green. Yeah, that means that those countries have a passport and or ID card with a chip. If it's light green, it means the country is, let's say, less forward with its country certificate. There are ways around it. It's too complicated for this 10 minutes. If it's dark green, we are all okay, right? So that means, for example, the whole EU is okay. Northern America is okay. Australia, New Zealand is okay. So these are countries where you can use that NFC trick to verify the authenticity of an identity document. To zoom in, let's zoom in on some use cases. Might be more interesting than the technology itself. So one that we are particularly proud of is from SKID Solutions. This is a company from Estonia. And they do digital signatures, and according to the qualified digital signatures, which is the highest level of digital signatures in the EU, and the holy grail of identity proving. And we worked with them, and got certified as the first worldwide to do this remote identity proving for these qualified digital signatures. And to quote their CEO, if you want to make sure that the document is real, and then identity was then and is used right now, then there's no alternative to NFC, and of course in combination again with biometrics to make sure that not someone borrowed the document. A second use case I want to highlight here is the Rabobank. So we work with Worldreach primarily with some travel-related cases. So I deliberately pointed out some non-travel-related cases here. So the Rabobank is the second biggest Dutch consumer bank, and they were the first worldwide to use NFC for onboarding, so for the Know Your Customer process. So this was 2017, December 2017, I think. The Rabo mobile identification app, it's called, right? So the primary case was a customer turning 18, they would have to go to a branch, they wouldn't do it, they would refuse and switch bank, etc. So you can do this remotely, but also new to bank, just signing up for the bank account or all kind of business cases, business users also used by the Rabobank. And the big success here was conversion. So the amount of consumers that would be able to do this went up from 35 to 60%. So they would have almost double their online customer onboarding process using ReadID and NFC. My last slide, so we can go to the panel, is a little bit on ReadID itself, because I've been talking about the technology primarily. And so a nice number here is from ABN AMRO, this third biggest Dutch bank. They recently went public for the mortgages application that 96% of the users in the first attempt make it through the whole process, including facial verification. So that's a very high percentage, right? For people in the audience that are maybe not so much in this industry, this is a really high percentage to have certainly on the first attempt. But also the EU settlements program that John already mentioned, right? So 68% said it was quite easy. And that's partly because of the main challenge in the process is how to properly position the document on the phone. So we have dynamic user guidance for this, and that helps a lot. Another point is that it's very scalable, right? Other technologies tend to have a human component in there. Humans simply do not scale as good as a machine somewhere in the cloud does. Proof of the pudding is in the eating, so please do feel free to maybe during the panel scan your own document or your own passport and see how it works. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Maarten. That was excellent. And please do kind of check it out if you can do. Right. Can we get all the panelists back online, unmuted, and the video turned on? We've got questions that have been coming in during the presentations. And I'd like to start off with one from Marta, who says, I think it's probably aimed at you, John. Can you get a verifiable credential of the settled status?
Yeah, that's a great question, and thank you for that question. I guess it's a reference specifically to the EU settlement scheme that I mentioned. It's run by the UK Home Office. The answer is theoretically yes, although in that case, as I say, that's not how we're doing it. So our piece, as I say, in other places, we're out there innovating around issuance, not just an initial IDV step, but issuance of a digital travel credential and multiple use cases, for example, travel and immigration purposes. Just on this particular question, the answer is what happens in terms of the credential is actually part of a bigger Home Office across the immigration spectrum thing that they call digital permissions. So the Home Office, I don't want to speak, I used to work for the Home Office in the UK for many years. I don't work for them anymore, so I better not speak on their behalf. But what they are doing, as we understand it, is a thing that they call digital permissions, which they issued a policy paper on recently, which is essentially a way that the public and indeed other folks that need to get verification, for example, employers, universities, landlords, can go to the Home Office and ask for verification of that person's status. But to the particular question, the Home Office is not issuing credentials, digital credentials to those people. But I'm not going to comment on it any further than that.
But Shiv, it is a possibility as a use case, isn't it? I mean, we're talking potential rather than actual.
No, absolutely. And I think what I can mention is like not about UK, but this similar thing is happening in US, where they are under innovation. They are looking at how they can the Home Office can use this verifiable credentials for this purpose with respect to immigration, visas, and everything. So it's a potential, and I think what is also happening in the UK is that the government it's quite interested in this technology with respect to decentralized identity, verifiable credentials. And then there are this is also being discussed in the Parliament, and also one of the I think public organizations which is taking a lead is actually NHS, which is already kind of doing pilots with this technology. But obviously, I think once a few successful pilots are there, I think I'm quite sure that I think even Home Office would use this for this very specific purpose also.
Thanks. I've got a question probably aimed at you, Maarten. It's from Jalil. I hope I pronounced that right. Thank you for the presentation. I would like to know how the face images are stored inside the chip. If it is not raw image, what is the regulation between countries to encode the face image?
So good question. So thank you. So the passport chips, as the whole passport, are standardized by ICAO. It's part of the United Nations. So they put a list of formats there. What I see in reality, there might be other formats allowed. I would have to look it up, but it's a JPEG or JPEG 2000, right? Because they are pretty efficient in compressing, right? Because a chip might sound like a lot of data. There's really a relatively low amount of data in there. So a photograph might be like 20 kilobytes of a JPEG. That is still high resolution compared to if you take a photograph of the document, because it's not obscured by something like watermarks, etc. So it gives a much better starting point for facial recognition. But it's a JPEG 2000, a little bit of a weird format, but it's more or less standardized and workable.
Okay. Second question, I think from the same person. What type of biometrics are accepted for the European Union now? I think this is for passports.
Yeah. So yeah, that's of course a very broad question, right? So it depends on the use case and consent, etc. But if I focus on passports, and that's probably what Jalil means, is that there can be actually a wet, like a JPEG of a wet signature on there, right? It's not really biometrics, but what's always in there is face image that's standardized worldwide, and what's almost always in there is fingerprints. The face image you can just read, right? It's not a problem. It's just meant to be read. Fingerprints is like half-half. So you can read it, but only with permission of the issuing country. So the government of the Netherlands would have to allow someone else to read it. In reality, within the EU, they're working on this for, I don't know, about 20 years, and they still haven't managed to exchange those. The chances of this being allowed to a non-EU country, in my personal view, are very small. At least I'm expecting to have retired, and maybe already my kids have retired before that has happened. Yeah, so I wouldn't hold my breath for that one. But the fingerprints are in there, and for example, for police use cases, they could be read by other countries, and we're actually working with 2 countries on this. So if the EU really gets their acts together and starts, let's say, actually empowering others to do it. As a commercial company, it's hopeless, right? So if I have a bank customer that says, I would like to read the fingerprints, I would say, you know, I would like that as well. And I would, you know, like global eating to be over and COVID to be gone, but it's not going to happen anytime soon. Okay.
Thank you for that, Maarten. I've got a question probably for John, I reckon. At the Home Office, we talked about kind of inclusive systems this morning in the presentation and the panel session. At the Home Office, what about non-connected people? How do you ensure anyone can apply?
Yeah, you're right. That's an important issue, Alan, because certainly we get this question quite a lot, which is, hey, you're doing some interesting stuff, which seems to be kind of pushing the envelope in terms of, you know, doing things remotely. I don't need to go anywhere. I don't need to send my documents. What about those people who are kind of the Home Office actually described, the UK government generally describes this as, which is a curious word actually, they call them vulnerable. I would think of that more as kind of marginal or digitally unconnected, but they tend to describe them as vulnerable. But I think the core of my answer is we would not make the claim that what we're doing captures 100% of people. I think the important thing is that there are multiple channels kind of ways. So if you're in the business of government to citizen services, which is largely where we operate, it's clearly the policy is for the government client and not for us to dictate. But the answer, I think, to the question is really around multiple channels. There has to be, is the remote digital way of doing things, of identifying yourself, an option rather than a requirement. And I think if it's an option, you're in safe territory, and allow the public to choose that if they want to, and give them other options as well if they want to choose those. And just to give some credit to the Home Office on that particular scheme, they did a huge amount of work in the community with local governments, etc., around the UK, providing places where folks who weren't able or didn't want to do the digital route to go to somewhere to be able to do that in person in a more traditional way. So that's not our piece of the puzzle, as you might imagine. That's the Home Office otherwise aside from us. But they've done a very nice job of that. I think the punchline of that answer, Alan, is considerably better than 90%. Somewhere in the middle, 90% of people chose the digital route. And that's what we're finding is if you make that available and the user experience is good and it works, we need to give people the option, but most of them will choose the thing that's convenient to them.
Add to that, we've seen that in other use cases as well, right? So typically it's used more than customers initially expected, right? They might expect an 80-20 and it becomes 90-10, or yeah. So the convenience factor of not having to go somewhere, not having to mail things is such that yeah, people are motivated to do it and manage to do it and are happy to do it. But not everyone, right? There will always be some exceptions, and you should allow for those.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Got a question for Shiv, I believe. It's on the benefits of SSI versus other identity solutions.
Okay, thank you for that question, Alan. So I think the way we have to compare this is like when we look at the evolution of digital identity, we basically started with those centralized solutions where basically one organization kind of does the issuance, and then they kind of control the data as well. And then eventually we moved to federated identity, where more than one organization started participating in basically issuing an identity and kind of using the same identity for multiple purposes. And then now we are basically in a stage where we are talking about a self-sovereign identity, which is a more user-centric identity, wherein the user is in control, right? Because when you look at this, now now all the services, most of the digital services when we talk about, they are quite user-centric, right? In the sense like the social media, the financial services, and then even the public services that are being provided. And that is where I think we are moving towards a world where the user becomes the center of the entire bouquet of services, and that is where the concept of self-sovereign identity comes in, wherein the user is basically able to control their identity. And it's also about basically, I think it's about the portability, interoperability, it's about security. So what an SSI does is that it allows the user to basically create a mechanism through which they can store their information and manage their information in a very privacy and consent oriented manner. So I think the key concept of SSI is about empowering users with data ownership, privacy, and consent, right? And I think that is one of the themes which even GDPR kind of talks about, because I think when we talk about data protection, we want to put the user back in control, right? With respect to what they want to do with their data, how they want to share, with whom they want to share, and for how long. And this is exactly what SSI enables. And this is where I think, and then also what happens is like, it also kind of, it's not just from a user perspective, but also from organizations perspective, for service providers perspective, it becomes easier for them to comply with data regulations, right? Because otherwise they have to spend a lot of money with respect to being in compliance with these laws, or they face fines which could run into billions, right? And this is where it's like this solution, it's user-centric, but it helps the businesses as well.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Thanks for that, Shiv. I've got an NFC question, so I believe that Maarten would probably be best to start off with this about. And I think it's related to AML5, but you can confer. In some cases, in some countries, video identification is used. For example, in Germany. Do you see this as a competing technology for NFC?
So it's certainly an older technology. So what we see is that it's in Germany, and I think it used to be in Switzerland and a little bit in Spain. So it's I wouldn't say it's competing. So it does two things, right? You wave your document in front of the camera. So that's kind of identity document verification, but in that sense it's competing. And then you do a kind of holder verification, as we call it. Is this really me? And then you add this bit like a real consent. Are you aware that you are opening up a bank account, for example, and not, applying for a lottery ticket? So what we typically do is, people don't really like that, right? So the drop-off rate is a lot. It takes a long time. It's very expensive. It doesn't scale. So, but we have some customers that replace the initial part of the process. So they use NFC to check that I really exist, right? So check the validity of my document. And then they use, instead of facial verification, they use a video process to check that, it's me and that I belong to that. For example, we have some experiments or pilots with notaries that do this, right? So they are very sensitive about, is someone aware that they're selling, for example, a house? So in that sense, we kind of replacing part of the process, and we partly working with them. Having said that, no one voluntarily does video identification, right? So it's typically regulator pushed, and regulators tend to move away from it. We see in several countries.
Okay.
Right. I'd like to add very quickly, Alan, to that, because I think this what Maarten just mentioned, right? This exactly same thing happened in India also. So the RBI, which is the main regulator, they have they want all the banks to basically go through this video KYC. It's very effort intensive, right? Because you are expecting somebody else from the bank or the financial institute to be on the other side interacting with the user. So the way I look at this is like, this is one step behind the digital onboarding, because with respect to how the way we are looking at identity proofing with respect to biometrics and everything, I think it's like eventually they would move to the fully automated digital onboarding. So it's like one step behind is what video KYC is, or video verification is.
Okay, and thanks for that. And I think this is a really good segue into our, not to plug our next session, which is on health credentials, but for seamless travel use cases, could passengers send health credentials as well as ID data? Is that something you can kick off with, John?
Yeah, so I mean, the short answer to that question is yes, but let me try and expand on that a little bit. In fact, we are hoping to do something similar, and I forgot to mention it, so thanks for the reminder. On the Canadian pilot that I described, the chain of trust, we're not doing this yet with real people, but we are behind the scenes integrating that system that I described, the chain of trust, with the common pass which is one of the health folks. If you're following the health debate, I know you've got a panel on it coming next, so I won't say too much, Alan, but for those who are following that debate will be aware that around the different regions of the world, we're getting a number of, maybe a half a dozen at least, major kind of efforts at doing a digital health pass of some kind. One of those is provided by an organization called the Commons Project that offers this service called Common Pass, which is essentially precisely about this. It's saying, you know, in parallel with the digital travel credential to cross the border, can we provide, not as part of that digital travel credential, because the DTC is the same structure as the passport, it's an ICAO standard, right? So we can't kind of have a health thing in there, but we can, in parallel with that, potentially tie it to securely a digital health pass that says this person has had, for example, is fully vaccinated. And we're doing that we are certainly looking with Canada Border Services Agency about the potential to add that into that pilot that I described.
Okay, excellent, thank you. I'm afraid that is all we have time for this session. Any unanswered questions, we will follow up individually with you. A big thank you to all of you for making this such a lively opening Q&A session for this afternoon. Thank you to our speakers, Shiv, John and Maarten. Get yourself a cup of coffee or tea, maybe some biscuits, and we shall see you back here at 3 p.m. UK time for what is expected to be a very lively discussion on the critical role of IDD for health and vaccine passports with a great lineup of panelists. Thank you very much.